So over the last few weeks, I've been considering the question, does size really matter? Now, before you worry that you've come across an OnlyFans page, don't panic, because today I'm going to be looking at scales within wargaming. Now, within wargaming, we talk about figures in terms of the scale, but we don't actually use the correct scale terminology like 1 to 56 or 1 to 72. We generally talk about figures based on the size of the figure when they are shrunk down to their scale. So, for example, we take a 6-foot person and we scale them down to 1 to 56 and we make them 28 mil tall. And likewise, in 172, a 6-foot individual would be scaled down to just 20 millimeters. So that's how we talk about scales, generally speaking, in the hobby. Now, today we're going to be looking at scales that I have within my collection, and we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of each one. So without further ado, let's start off with the smallest scale of 2 mil and see what advantages and disadvantages there are with that size. Now, regular viewers of the channel will know that I've been doing a lot of work in 2 mil for my Lord of the Rings project, and this has been a lot of fun. Now, some of the advantages of using 2 mil is that, first of all, you can get a really good big battle scale conflict on a tabletop. It doesn't have to be a huge tabletop, and it is very manageable. On top of that, it actually looks like a big battle with lots and lots of individuals and fighters within the battle, rather than say a 28 mil scale big battle where you might have 30 figures per base, and that's supposed to represent thousands of figures. So in terms of the sort of figure to individual ratio, we can get a lot closer with 2 mil. Now, I personally find 2 mil very easy and very quick to paint as well. The units go together very quickly, and although perhaps not as detailed, and that could be one of the disadvantages, these figures are really quick to paint and get an army together in very quick time. You've also got on top of that the cost aspect. The figures are relatively cheap per unit, and in terms of storage, they also don't need a huge amount of space. You can get a couple of armies into a nice reasonable size plastic box, and therefore you're not having to have stacks and stacks of boxes storing your army. So certainly from my perspective, 2 mil is a wonderful scale. Now, in terms of the disadvantages, you ultimately can't get the sort of small skirmish type of conflicts played in 2 mil. It is much more designed for big battles, and you don't get that sort of tactical level feel with 2 mil. On top of that, some people do not like the repetitive nature of painting, particularly when you are just putting dots of paint along row after row after row of figures. It can be a bit repetitive, and a real concern is the potential for eye strain. So it is recommended that after sort of 5 minutes, take a break, come back to it, do a bit more, and take another break, and give your eyes a chance to take a rest. But that's 2 mil. Let's move on to 6 mil. Now, for those of you who have been watching the channel for many, many years, probably since the 2010s, that sort of time, when I first started the channel, you might remember that I've used 6 mil for AWI, the American War of Independence. In more recent times, I've also been working on a Macedonian army in 6 mil. And my new project, which I'll be revealing in the next week or two, I'll be using 6 mil figures once again. Now, there's again great advantages to 6 mil. You can get a lot of figures onto relatively small bases, and you can again get that feel of bigger units. And you can get those units onto a table and still have space to maneuver, which for me, I particularly like in the ancient period, because I believe the tactics of flanking lines or combat lines was quite common, and therefore having the space on the sides of your tables to get those flanking maneuvers done is a huge benefit. Now, again, they're relatively quick to paint. There is a bit more detail on 6mm than there is on 2mm, so that's another positive, but not sort of too much detail that you need to go into necessarily using washes and doing highlights. You can, of course, but you save yourself a little bit of time on the painting. On the disadvantage side, of course, some people again still feel those figures are too small, and again, the eye strain is a concern. But again, another positive, storage, again, much easier, and the cost per unit can also be significantly cheap. For my latest project, it's working out at around £2.50 a unit, which in terms of 28mm, you probably wouldn't get much for £2.50. So that's 6mm. Again, another scale that, along with 2mm, I would highly recommend if you haven't tried them before, particularly if you're going for bigger battles. Next up, we're going to touch on 10mm. And for those, again, who've watched my channel for a while, you will have seen some Falklands figures in 10mm on the channel. Now, I think 10mm is starting to move closer to the tactical level. And for me, using 10mm for the Falklands, my plan is to use that more for company level or even maybe a regiment size conflicts, where you could maybe put quite a few figures on a base, but not too many, and those bases could represent squads or even platoons and maybe even companies, so you can really play around with it. Now, 10mm definitely has a lot more detail than 6mm, or tends to, in the figures, and so if you're looking for more detailed figures, then 10mm is a nice happy place between a lot of detail and not a lot of detail that you would see, say, in 2mm or 6mm. Again, storage wise, not too bad, very similar to 6mm, and you can fit a good number of figures on a base similar to that you would use for 6mm. Again, really good positives there. However, on the downsides, you're still in that kind of space where you might have to be a little bit abstract in how many figures you have on a base versus what you're representing. So, for example, a company might have 100 men in, but if you're representing that on a base of 10mm, you might only be looking at maybe 4 to 8 figures. So you obviously have quite a gap between the two. In terms of playing as well, you might use 10mm again on for bigger battles, and again you're still should have space on the table, but you might not be attacking a village. You might be attacking you might not be having on your table lots and lots of buildings. You might just have a smallish base with, say, 3 or 4 bases, and that would allow you to represent a village without being as one-to-one as, say, something like 28mm would. Now, I will just add on this, and we'll kind of rope in 12 and 13.5, so that epic scale, and 15mm in. I don't have any epic or 12mm or 15mm in my collection. It's not scales that I choose to, but falls very similarly towards that 10mm, and all those scales you could probably tie in to one category. So having briefly talked about those and just given a nod to them, let's move on to 20mm. The 20mm is a scale that I really enjoy working with, particularly for more skirmish level games. I really got into this around 2017, 2018 when I moved back to the UK and started getting into the World War II game Battle Group. And probably influenced by Pierce Brand and his love for what he calls God's own scale, 20mm. But 20mm for me is a really nice size figure, and the units don't take up as much footprint as, say, 28mm. And therefore, for games that are at that platoon level, World War II games in particular, but I've used them for moderns as well, you can have a 6 by 4 foot table and have a really good skirmish without it feeling too crowded. And there's room to maneuver, and the ranges are a decent size with that scale where it feels just a little bit more realistic. And that's a personal opinion. That's not necessarily fact, but that's certainly an opinion I hold, and I know others hold it too. 20mm is a bit of a scale from the early days of wargaming. I know a lot of Airfix models at that 1/72 scale fall into that 20mm, and so for a lot of people it is a real sort of memory of their childhood playing with Airfix figures. Now there are a lot out on the market, and I have to say that probably some of the best figures I've ever seen, AB miniatures, fall into the 20mm category. The scale and the proportions just feel very realistic, and the detail is very crisp and excellent. And I really enjoy painting 20mm figures. I find them relatively quick compared to 28mm, and certainly the figure ranges out there are really good. Now, saying that, 20mm obviously is taking up a lot more space than the smaller scales, and you're not really portraying huge units with 20mm. Although, again, as I said earlier, you can, they just don't look quite as realistic, I guess, or as representative. Doesn't give me that feeling of looking at a large unit when I see the 20 or 28mm figures representing large units. So that is a downside to them. But as I say, if you're playing skirmish level games and the more tactical level, then this is a really good scale. And again, if you haven't tried 20mm before, then I would highly recommend it. So let's move on to the final scale of 28mm and check out what those positives and negatives are about that scale. So moving on to the last scale in my collection, 28mm. Now 28mm figures are absolutely fantastic for skirmish games. I would say that perhaps platoon level, to me, it feels just a little bit too big, takes up too much space on the table, particularly when you're looking at vehicles like tanks. They really are very imposing and take up a lot of space on the table. However, for games like Dead Man's Hand, where maybe you're looking at 3 to 5, 6 figures per side, this is fantastic. So that those games, Dead Man's Hand being one, What a Cowboy, or even looking at the Chicago Way. You could also look at other games out there where you're looking for small numbers of figures. Stargrave would be another great example. 28mm just feels like a really good size, and I'll tell you why. First of all, the detail on the figures is often very good, and I know a lot of people prefer painting 28mm because it's that much bigger. They feel like they can do a far better job and get the details. In terms of what's out there on the market, there's loads of 28mm figures out there. It does seem to feel like a scale that many wargamers play in, and therefore it means there's a lot more range out there. Now, in terms of storage, they do take up a lot more space. And of course, when it gets to the terrain side of things as well, the terrain is that much bigger and again needs a lot more space when it comes to storage. But 28mm really allows you to have a skirmish game where you can really get into the small details rather than thinking about a battle as a bigger picture. And for me, I've really enjoyed using 28mm figures for Dead Man's Hand, for the Chicago Way, and generally for those games where I'm not having to paint a huge number of figures. So that really covers off the advantages and disadvantages. There's probably lots more that I've missed out, and this is really only just a small, quick snapshot of scales and what you could use the different scales for. And like most wargamers, I am an absolute sucker for getting different scales for different games, different projects, and that's part of the fun of the hobby, I think. Now, One of the things I would suggest and offer some advice is that when you are thinking of starting a new project, consider what sort of level of game that you're going to try to play. So, for example, taking the Napoleonic period, are you going to be looking at the big battles, maybe like Waterloo, where you are taking the whole of one side and playing the whole of the other side? Or are you more interested in maybe the small skirmishes, maybe influenced by TV shows like Sharp or Hornblower, where you're looking at maybe a dozen figures aside? You're going to play a game, maybe something like Sharp Practice. Then you might consider a different scale of figure than if you're going to be playing the mass battles of the Napoleonic Wars. So consider what level of game you want to play. And then also consider things like your budget. How much money have you got to spend? How much space have you got to store things like terrain or the figures themselves? And also consider your playing area. Have you got enough space to be playing maybe on a 8x6 table if you're doing a mass battle or a large battle in 28mm? Have you got a small table, in which case maybe smaller scale is the way to go? And maybe you also want to consider your time constraints. Do you need to get this project completed by a certain point, or have you got a lot of time to be spending on this project? Either way, it's up to you. This is the beauty of the hobby. You can do really whatever you want in whatever scale you want. Also, I suppose one last thought, do consider who you're playing with. Are you producing both armies for the game, or are you going to be working with somebody to produce both armies? So that's just a few thoughts from me about scales in wargaming. Now, before I rabbit on too long, I just want to let you know that next Sunday I will be back with another video, and I will be this time launching my latest and newest project. So if you're interested in what that is, then do check that video out. Unfortunately, this Wednesday, however, I won't be around for a live stream. I'm away with work and I won't be able to do the live stream. But do check out the following Wednesday, where I hope to be back for the live stream and hopefully cracking on with my latest project. So if you're curious, definitely join me 8 o'clock Wednesday for that live stream. And that's not this coming Wednesday the 22nd, but it will be the following Wednesday the 29th. But anyway, a big thank you to everybody for your support, for watching the channel. And if you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, do please consider doing so. And until next time, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.